My name is Anna Monica and I represent the Italian Chamber of Commerce and Industry in Poland. And I have pleasure to welcome you on our third webinar, Road to IABM. Road to IABM is the important part of the promotional campaign of our flag event that many of you for sure already know, that is International Automotive Business Meeting, which this year will be the online edition. Let me give you the flavor of the IABM. So International Automotive Business Meeting 2020 online edition will take place on the 20th of October. Registration is already open on the website event, aibmevent.com. Concerning today's webinar, it is organized in collaboration with Polish Alternative Fuels Association, that is member of the European Association for Electromobility, ABER. And we will talk about Poland's road to e-mobility. Let me now introduce our speakers. Alexander Reich, Director of External Relations of the PSPA, and Filip Opoka, Partner, NGL Legal. I want to tell you that at the end of the presentations, there will be the Q&A session. So if you have the questions, you can write, you can type them in chat. We will try to reply to all of them. Let me now finally give the floor to the President of the Italian Chamber of Commerce and Industry in Poland, Piero Cannas.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure to host this third webinar, Road to International Automotive Business Meeting, that we organize joining with our partner Katowice Special Economic Zone and Silesia Automotive Cluster. Electromobility is one of the challenges of the future in the future for the sector, and our panelists today will update us where Poland is going, which challenges is facing to be ready for the future of automotive sector. So I give the floor to our panelists, and thank you to everybody for being with us today. Thank you.
Okay, is it me now? Yeah.
Oh, sorry, I didn't turn on the microphone. I give the floor to Alexander Reich, the Director of External Relations of Polish Alternative Fuels Association. Sorry.
Okay, hi. I don't know if everybody can hear me. Yeah?
Yes, yes.
Okay, so yes, my name is Alexander Reich. I'm the Director for External Relations in the Polish Alternative Fuels Association. I am here in a double role today because I was meant to be the panelist regarding the substantial part, but I will also be filling in for our CEO, Maciej Mazur, our Managing Director, who's also the Vice President of ABER, the European Association for E-Mobility. Thank you very much to the Italian Chamber of Commerce and Industry in Poland for co-hosting this event with us. That's very kind, and we're delighted to have this opportunity. Of course, we also perceive e-mobility as the future of the automotive sector. And I think that's not so innovative. I mean, it's already happening around the world. There are countries and states that are absolute leaders in this market, and Poland is trying to follow suit as best as it can. So having said that, I think I will share my screen and provide you with the presentation to maybe talk a little bit about what PSPA does and how we view the Polish market, where it is now, where it will be in the future, and our assessment of all those issues. Let me try to share. I don't know if everybody can see the presentation.
Yes.
Okay. All right, that's good. So, as PSPA, we are the largest industry organization in Poland. We associate over 140 corporate members at the moment. We are the third organization in Europe in terms of associated entities. We definitely associate the largest group of market professionals, experts, and all those related with the industry. We have a staff of lecturers and experts who help us develop the e-mobility market in Poland. We also have a profound experience at the moment because we've developed, our average is about 50 projects annually of a various scope and of a various size, but yeah, and they all now play a natural part of the every year calendar of e-mobility related events. In terms of our members, as you see, the list here is quite wide, and these are just examples. In terms of corporate members, we associate organizations and companies from the automotive market.
I'm sorry, Alexander. Just if you can mute your microphone, please. Okay, thank you.
It was Ricardo, I already muted him.
You want me to mute my microphone?
It's okay, please continue.
Okay, all right. Fine, then I'm, yeah. So I'll start again. We have the automotive sector, the sector of, within the entire value chain of e-mobility. So we have charging companies, charging infrastructure companies, ranging from the international global brands such as UC ABB and Gigaro, all the way through Polish companies like Energetyka. We have energy members, we have oil and gas members, we have financial market members, and as well, we cooperate very closely with local self-authorities, so various municipalities in Poland. One of the many projects we've implemented was called the e-mobility in practice training and educational campaign. We went around municipalities that underwent the obligations imposed by the alternative fuels, e-mobility, the Act on E-mobility and Alternative Fuels. As you can see, the list is very wide. We've trained approximately 50 municipalities altogether, ranging from the largest and most renowned, as you see, Warsaw, Kraków, Łódź, Wrocław, all the way through the less known Polish cities, Ełk, Częstochowa, Wejherowo, Elbląg. The list goes on. We also cooperate very widely and intensively with public institutions, academic institutions, analysis and study partners that help us shape our reports, our studies, our surveys into the market of e-mobility. We work closely with the Ministry of Climate, Ministry of Development, with the Polish Development Fund, and many, many others. Now, the structure of our association is based on 4 pillars. The first one, and I think quite significant one, is the Competence Center. So that is the part of the association that shapes the trainings, the webinars, all the competence shaping activities of the association. That's where we train both business and local self-authorities, and that's where we draft all those trainings and shape them. The second one is the Legislative Center, also quite an important part, because of course, we believe that e-mobility and its development rests on the business and the technology side, on the innovation side and the creativity side, but also on the preparation of the state to introduce all those new technologies. So basically, when the law is ready, all the business can thrive within this environment. So our legislative center is the place where we innovate legislation, where we think of all the areas that can be amended, developed in terms of the legal environment that e-mobility is developed in. Our third pillar is the Research and Analysis Center. This is where we shape our analysis and the reports that we make, where we accumulate the data, where we accumulate knowledge, and basically where we build the foundation of what we then communicate and what we then elaborate on further to the business that we operate in. And lastly, the New Mobility Center, incidentally, our headquarters. Of course, everyone is welcome to visit, where we perceive this place as also the headquarters for e-mobility in Poland. So this is where we'd like to host discussions, conferences, but also meetings regarding the development of e-mobility. This is where we host some of the meetings within the main projects that we develop that you see on the bottom of the slide, which we describe as our brands. Some of them I've already talked about, some of them I haven't touched upon yet. There's the White Book on e-mobility, which is an analysis, a very in-depth study of all the areas of law that need to be developed and enhanced in order to develop e-mobility efficiently. But we have the Barometer of New Mobility. We have the TCO analysis, the zero-emission mission that we did together with Volkswagen. We also have our campaign, which will soon be launched, electromobility.pl, very intense, huge projects that we're developing. So as you see, we really profoundly develop these brands. Now, that was about us. And we, of course, try to do everything we can to make this market very robust. But this market today, the Polish automotive market, it's one of the largest in Europe. As you see, the total number of registered vehicles is nearly 20 million, out of which every year, 500,000 new vehicles are registered. But it's also, I think, interesting to note that nearly 1 million are re-registered. So the used vehicles registration numbers are also quite significant. And what this shows is that our market really has a lot of potential to develop. But at the same time, in terms of EV, the numbers are not so impressive at the moment. There are about 13,000 registered EVs, both plug-ins and full EVs. And if you think about that, there are two, I think, observations to make. On one hand, the market is very young, very underdeveloped in terms of the vehicle car park. And there's a question that we may ask ourselves, you know, what is there to do? But at the same time, we perceive it as an ideal point to really launch the development of e-mobility fully. So Poland is on the cusp of a big EV revolution. Things are already happening in terms of the EV market. It could go faster, and we're working very hard to increase that pace. But in terms of infrastructure, charging infrastructure, we are European leaders, I think. We have over 1,224 charging stations. That's 2,000 charging points altogether. And that compared versus the EV car park in Poland is actually an impressive ratio. So in terms of infrastructure, we are a little bit further than we are with the vehicles and the legislation and other parts of the development that are necessary. I think what every presentation and every market, every sector of the economy right now has to take into account is, of course, the COVID-19 pandemic. And herein, we see that the pandemic has been very bad for the ICE, the conventional vehicles, which have dropped by 30% in terms of registration. And these are European data. In terms of EVs, electrical passenger cars, not the utility vehicles, not the buses, we have had a nearly 90% increase. So for the EV sector market, it's actually not been that bad. The development of the infrastructure, as you see on the third graph, it had a small bump towards the end of February, beginning of March, so right into the pandemic, but it has risen up back to impressive rates after the pandemic has stabilized. Of course, in terms of Poland, we started thinking about e-mobility seriously, also from the standpoint of the legislator of the public administration. Therein, between June and July, there have been 3 support programs which were introduced. They were divided in relation to the type of vehicle that they concerned. So we had a personal car passenger vehicle, we had a utility vehicle, and we had a taxi or a passenger transport vehicle. The first program, the green car, I will not delve into the minute details of these programs, but you see there was a budget actually dedicated to them and market conditions that were provided. We think that this is a very good way to start these support programs, these incentives and mechanisms that are provided. Of course, we think we can do much better, and we also think that a lot more has to be done. And we as an organization are very involved with both the National Environmental Protection Fund to speak about widening these programs, making them bigger, extending them, so enhancing the budget, but also increasing the incentive amount and the vehicle price level that is allowed to participate in the program. As we say, we think these are very good starting points, but they need to be developed much, much more into full incentive and financial mechanisms that can help develop Polish e-mobility further. And of course, we would like to rely a lot on the good examples we see from the countries who are e-mobility leaders in Europe and globally. So Poland, of course, the car park you saw in terms of EVs is not that significant compared to, for example, Sweden, 20% of all the car park of EVs. But we are leaders in different regards. As you see, Poland is an exporter and a producer of many, many components which are necessary and vital for e-mobility to develop. We are surely a leader and a market leader in terms of e-buses. Over 20 cities in Poland currently use e-buses in their fleet. There are over 400 e-buses in those fleets, so this is an impressive number and a large number. We are also the largest e-bus exporter in Europe, thanks to the companies currently run by Solaris and Volvo, but there are MAN and Rafako sites that are planned and will be developed in order to produce more EV buses. So in that regard, we're leaders, but also in terms of lithium-ion batteries and batteries in general for e-mobility. The LG Chem company that we have listed here is being extended and developed. It will surpass, in terms of volume and production capacity, the Tesla site in Nevada. So these are pretty impressive both information and data and possibilities that Poland is developing currently. Of course, we have some sites producing the EV charging station components, ABB, but also Polish companies, as you see, spaced around Poland and very active. And last but not least, of course, we don't have EVs produced in Poland. Of course, apart from e-buses and utility vehicles, which are produced in Września, but passenger cars, EVs, are not being produced in Poland yet, I hope. I hope that this market will develop and there will be more to come in this regard. But as you see, there are places where we are leaders, and there is a lot of work that is happening within the e-mobility value chain in Poland that is being developed currently. Now, as some of you may know, Poland has introduced the Act on E-Mobility and Alternative Fuels in February 2018. This is a very important law because it imposes obligations on local authorities and the Polish market in general, which help to really develop the market in Poland. As you see, in the years 2021, 2023, 2025, the Act actually imposes 100% rises in the quota of the fleet that needs to be electric. This means not only the mass transportation, so buses and other vehicles, this also means the personal vehicles used within the fleets of the local authorities. Now, the local authorities are actually adapting to the obligations of the law. And you see in those numbers that the amount of tenders that are being organized is significant. There's a lot going on. These local municipalities are ordering both buses and electric vehicles, personal electric vehicles, to fulfill the obligations they have, which are imposed by the law. And of course, these are proportional to the populations and the scope of the budget of the cities involved, but they're all very significant and they all look very good for the future. The Act on E-Mobility and Alternative Fuels does not only do that, it also has obligations in terms of charging infrastructure. And as you see here, these obligations are quite ambitious, and they're also being fulfilled at a great pace and great efficiency. The highest number, of course, concerns major agglomerations, so over 1 million residents, over 600,000 vehicles, and so on. That requires 1,000 charging points to be made, and until this year. Of course, for some municipalities in the lower areas there, this may not be fulfilled, but we have it on good account, and all the information that we aggregate and accumulate, that they are working very hard to meet those ambitious goals. The Act on E-Mobility and Alternative Fuels introduced some very major changes. We actually took it upon ourselves to educate local authorities, as I mentioned before, to show them what the obligations are, but also to show them where they can find the solutions to those obligations, how they can meet them, who to cooperate with, how to begin cooperating with these entities, how to organize those tenders. So we also played a large part in helping to implement this act. And the White Book on E-Mobility that we are developing is also focused on developing further legal solutions such as this one. For example, the e-tariff, which is a tariff specialized for those entities who want to connect to the state grid and make charging stations. So the e-tariff will be a breakthrough situation, because so far such operators, such companies have to use household tariffs, which is economically not sound and technologically not sound, quite frankly. As a leading market organization, of course, we make forecasts and prognosis for the future. And we assume 4 scenarios, which are mostly based on how many incentives, how many mechanisms will be introduced to support this process. We like to think that there are 2 viable scenarios, the realistic scenario and the optimistic scenario in its first version. And as you see, even in the realistic scenario, which we consider slightly less dynamic development, by 2025 we would have a sale number of close to 100,000 fully electric vehicles. By 2030, nearly 140,000. Of course, the optimistic scenario where VAT allowances would be at their maximum, where there would be moderate subsidies, but well thought and well funded and structured mechanisms, those numbers are much higher. We can reach the 230 number from the realistic scenario in 225 already in the optimistic one, and rise up to 170,000 sold BEVs in 230, and this optimistic version of what can happen. In terms of fleet, numbers are also rising, and we also assume a realistic and optimistic scenario here. So we think that by 2030, we can exceed 1 million BEVs, and if those mechanisms are in place, if the legislation is in place, if the administrative support goes along with the technology and the business, and they all meet, which partially we also perceive as our role to stimulate that process. In terms of plug-in hybrids, now this is the most dynamic development in the first 5 years in terms of e-mobility. Always the plug-in hybrids, they rise very fast at the beginning, and then they level out because obviously EVs gain the momentum after that, full BEVs. So we see that by 2025 we will have around 160 plug-in hybrid vehicles. By 2030 that number will nearly triple. So as you can see, the number is very large at the beginning, and then it gets leveled in terms of geometric growth. What we're already not bad in, as in the situation in e-mobility in Poland is already developed quite well in this area, is the infrastructure for EV charging. And in this regard, I think you see the data is growing very dynamically, and it's very optimistic. By 2025, we would have up to 40,000 charging ports. That's 12,000 charging stations. Taking into account the fact that it's 5 years from today, that data is very impressive. And it also shows that it's growing very, very fast. We have both, as I mentioned, also foreign global partners and companies doing this in Poland, enhancing this development, but also local Polish companies that do this. These numbers will also grow very rapidly since they're already quite robust. In 2030, we expect a number of about 90,000, a little over that, charging points. So, yeah. In general, I think the market is at a very kind of young, early development level. But as you can see, a lot is happening. There are sites, facilities that are developing technology and products and components. Law is being changed and is being ameliorated. A lot of business is coming in to develop this market, and we are still pursuing the leaders in terms of the global market and the European market, but we are working very hard at it, and we are doing quite a good job, I think, which is discernible from the data that I presented. So thank you for your attention, and if there are any questions, I will be glad to address them.
Microphone.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much, Alexander. Now I want to give the floor to Filip Opoka, who will tell us about the legal challenges for e-mobility.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for invitation to this meeting. I'm glad to be here. My name is Filip Opoka. I'm an attorney at law working in NGL Legal in the energy department and department who is dealing also with the environment. So electromobility is in the center of my interest, let's say, also professional interest, but I'm also a fan of cars, so I'm also a fan of electromobility in general, not only as a professional. I work closely with the Polish Association of Alternative Fuels, and as Alexander said before, I take part quite often in the electromobility in practice trainings for the local municipalities. So I present the legal aspects of electromobility, of development of electromobility in Poland. Today, let me share with you my presentation. I will try to...
Yes, we see it.
Yes, okay, good. I will try to describe to you how electromobility in Poland develops from the legal perspective. I will tell you, if I was to tell you something about the agenda of my presentation, at first a couple of words about where we are at the moment. Alexander has already touched a few things about it in his presentation regarding the Act on Electromobility and how it developed the market and it created the market in general in Poland. I will tell you a couple of words about work in progress. As in the case of where we are, obviously, you may know some information about how electromobility is regulated in terms of legal provisions. I hope that in the next part, work in progress, you will see some information that will be maybe new for you in terms of those regulations that are actually being consulted and being created in the legislative process. And to end with, I will describe a few things which we should see in the future, or we are expecting to see in the future. There are some postulates and some proposals for legislative changes and amendments that actually could influence the market and speed up the process of development of electromobility in Poland. Like Alexander said, this is a very vivid market, and we try to be the leader, but obviously there are there are stronger competitors on the market, like the Nordic countries or the Germany and Western countries. But we try to cooperate with the government, and the Polish Association of Alternative Fuels try to cooperate with the government to speed up this process. So I hope to put some stress on those issues which are important from the legal perspective to develop the market. To start with where we are, like Alexander said, we have an Act on Electromobility and Alternative Fuels which entered into force in 2018. This is a history, let's say it's 3 years since the Act came into force, so it has established a market. As you know, as you probably know, there is some in the Act, the legislation, legislator put some stress on infrastructure, charging infrastructure, actually requiring a certain minimal number of public chargers to be constructed and installed in cities above 100,000 citizens. This is not an obligation imposed on the local governments, but is actually developed in 2 stages. One of the stages is actually ongoing at the moment, which is the construction of infrastructure by the entities which actually see their business model in this activity, and if until end of March 2021 there will be not enough infrastructure in the cities above 100,000 citizens, the local distribution system operators, electro-energy distribution system operators will actually come in and build the remaining part of or remaining number of public charging infrastructure. This is actually a quite solid requirement from the Act, so we can expect that the number of public charging points will increase in the future. It doesn't mean that this is a perfect solution, but obviously it make the markets more vivid, and we can see that chargers are actually visible on our streets and can be used by electric vehicles users. This is what we perceive as a let's say success of the market and of the Act itself. On the other hand, the Act on Electromobility and Alternative Fuels imposed certain obligations on the local governments in order to render public tasks with use of electric vehicles or powered with CNG or LNG. This refers to local governments of above 50,000 citizens, so the threshold was put a bit lower, as in the case of public infrastructure, public charging infrastructure. At the same time, the Act imposed analogical requirements with respect to rendering public transport services with use of zero-emission buses, and it also imposed some obligations on the office that is actually serving the purposes of the local government to use a certain number of the fleet of electric vehicles. As you could see on Alexander's slides, those obligations are already to enter into force as of 2022, and in the case of buses as of 2021, and you can actually see it on the Polish streets of Polish cities, that the buses are electric buses are the most common electric vehicles, I must say, that you can see. So this part of the market has also grown quite vividly, mainly due to the fact that there were a couple of support schemes, funds for local governments that actually allowed local governments to purchase or to acquire somehow the electric buses. On the other hand, we have a regulation in the Act on electromobility and alternative fuels, which is not very successful, which is a low emission transport zones. They are allowed to be established by local governments, but until now only one local government found enough courage to introduce it in its city, but after protest from its citizens, the low emission transport zone was actually deleted in practice. So this is one of the points which should be developed in the future in order to somehow incentivize acquisition of electric vehicles. On the other hand, as I said, there are certain support schemes that were introduced by the Act on Electromobility and other acts connected with electromobility. We have free parking for EVs, we have bus lanes accessible for EVs, so EVs may access bus lanes to drive in cities which has such bus lanes. There are some tax incentives, and like Alexander said, we had a quite long discussion with the Low Emission Transport Fund. Many legal regulations were designed and created for the purpose of this fund to function, but recently it was actually closed, so the low emission transport fund was not used in order to support acquisition of electric vehicles. At the moment, we have one of the programs, which is Green Car Fund. We can see that not many applications were involved in this process. I hope this is just a start, and this will work better in the future. What's work in progress and what's ahead of us? At the moment in the legislative process, we can see a couple of changes that will actually touch the electromobility market. First of all, we can see the regulation or draft of the regulation on minimal connection capacity. This is one of the measures that was actually introduced by the Act on Electromobility and Alternative Fuels. But as of 2018, there was no consent how to actually approach this issue, and we are at the moment discussing the newest draft of this regulation. This is generally speaking purposed in order to equip the new public buildings and residential buildings in the cities above 100,000 citizens with the connection capacity that is actually reserved for the purpose of installation of charging infrastructure in those buildings, meaning that actually this is one of the steps in the direction of development of the private or half private charging infrastructure, which is from the perspective of development of a e-mobility market in Poland is very important, as majority of EVs are actually charged not on the streets and not between the cities, but rather in the places where they are parked, meaning that residential buildings and public buildings where their users actually work. So this is very important for the development of the EV market in Poland. At the moment, as you can see, the plan is to impose an obligation on developers building such buildings to equip them with a proper connection capacity. It is 20% of the planned number of parking spaces in the case of public buildings times the 3.7 kilowatts of capacity, and this does not mean in terms of residential buildings it is 100% of planned number of parking spaces times the 3.7 kilowatts. It doesn't mean that the residential or public buildings actually have to be equipped with the physical charging infrastructure, but only the conditions that actually allow such infrastructure to be connected in those buildings. Another act which was actually touched by Alexander also in his presentation is the regulation on e-tariff, which is also a draft and discussed at the moment. So this is a work in progress still, but it is also very important from the perspective of public charging infrastructure developers and operators, since we do not have many cars and not many charging services or not enough charging services are rendered by the charging infrastructure, public charging infrastructure. It is difficult to acquire as much money from users of EVs for the purpose of let's say keeping up the connection to the grid. At the moment, the connection to the grid is charged based on, to simplify the whole process, actually based on a fixed fee, which is paid regardless of the consumption of energy by this particular installation, and by the variable fee. In the case of charging infrastructure, which to a certain extent is not used very often, it means that the fixed fee, which is quite high, is a big burden for infrastructure operators, charging infrastructure operators. That's the regulation. The draft of the regulation actually tries to change the situation and move the burden from the fixed fee to a variable fee, which is connected with the electricity consumption. As you can see, at the moment, the regulation actually proposes that 300% of variable fee will be charged, but only in the case the electricity is consumed in the public infrastructure. Another regulation that is actually currently discussed, but discussed for quite a long time now, is the draft amendment to the energy law, which also introduces some further steps in the development of e-mobility market. It introduces at the moment mainly the definitions of vehicle-to-grid infrastructure, so the charging infrastructure, which is actually capable of not only charging but also off-taking electricity from electric vehicles. This is just a very beginning of this process, so I don't believe this can make a real difference, but I understand this is a start of discussion about how to organize the electro-energy market when cars may enter this electro-energy market actually as participants. From the legal perspective, and when we see it as a challenge, we cannot see in those regulations that are actually on the table at the moment any obligations to install a minimal number of vehicle-to-grid chargers. So there's not a lot much to be done in the future in order to introduce vehicle-to-grid into the market. And what's the future? The future is actually connected with regulations referring, for example, because this is some kind of selection. We do not have enough time to discuss every regulation in this regard, but in the future we will face the necessity to actually implement into the Polish legal framework of the Directive 844 on the energy efficiency. Part of this directive is actually purposed for electromobility, and this actually refers to proper or development of buildings in a way that allow connection of chargers in those buildings. This refers to new buildings. On this slide you can see public buildings with more than 10 parking spaces. The directive actually requires that new buildings of such kind and buildings of this type, which are substantially renovated, has to be equipped with at least one charging point. This is a physical infrastructure for charging purposes. And what's more important, those buildings have to be equipped with ducting infrastructure, which has to be placed on at least one on every 5 parking spaces. So we are in Poland and in other countries as well ahead of transposition of this directive into local legislation. The question is whether we are going to implement this regulation in a minimal standard, or we are going to go a bit further and, for example, increase the obligations imposed on developers of buildings. As I said, the same requirement actually refers to residential buildings of above 10 parking spaces, having above 10 parking spaces, and new buildings and substantially renovated. The difference is that in residential buildings only the ducting infrastructure has to be installed, but it has to be installed on every parking space in such residential buildings. This is definitely a good step in development of the market and allowing EV users actually to charge their cars in the places where they live and they work. Some additional points to mention. I don't say that there are measures that or solutions that are actually available on the table how to do it, but from my perspective and from the perspective of the Polish Association of Alternative Fuels, it is important to introduce actually an effective support scheme purpose for acquisition of EVs. As I said, the Low Emission Transport Fund was closed before it started operation. The green car is actually at the very beginning of this process, and the first round cannot be called a really big success. We hope that the next rounds will be more successful, and actually we will go into the direction of Norway, where everyone is interested in buying an EV instead of combustion engine car. The next big question actually awaits us in the future, also in the regulation, because as Alexander said, in those scenarios of development of e-mobility in Poland, there are lots of ifs, and law is one of those ifs, and the time of development of regulations that will actually support development of EVs is very important. One of the very important issues in this area is transformation of electro-energy sector in general, but also in terms of electromobility part that will allow quicker development of grids for the purpose of installation of chargers in buildings. This is one of the tasks that were actually touched by the white paper on electromobility mentioned by Alexander earlier. We have worked out some solutions in this white paper, how to actually increase the number of charging infrastructure in public and building and residential buildings, but also we have touched the issue of existing buildings, because there is no regulation at the moment referring to installation of infrastructure in existing buildings, and there are, in Poland at least, there are quite a lot of problems with installing such infrastructure in existing buildings. Like I said, regulations referring to vehicle to grid actually requires further works because it's still at a very early stage and not complete in order to say that vehicle to grid may be operational, and this is ahead of us as well. And also a proposal which is raised by public charging infrastructure developers is the facilitation of the construction process in the terms of interconnection to the grid. As far as I know, it's about 15 to 18 months to actually build such interconnection, especially in the case of high capacity charging infrastructure. So it takes a lot of time at the moment to develop such infrastructure. Those are the topics which should be raised in the future, and we expect to raise them with our talks with the government and other officials in order to speed up the process of development of mobility in Poland. This is just shortly about the legal framework of mobility, what's on the markets at the moment, what we can expect in the future. I'm ready to discuss with you if you have any questions. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. I see that we have some questions, and since we have still a few minutes to finish, let's try to answer. So the first question is, what is the status of the project Izera, the first Polish electric car? I don't know if Alexander or Philip, you can try to answer the microphone.
I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes.
Okay, so yeah, I can start, and maybe Philip can add some remarks. Well, the first question about Izera, it's really a question about something that hasn't been factually presented yet. I mean, we have seen designs and only designs. We have been given no information where the components and what components of this vehicle will be used, where they will be produced, and what systems would this vehicle be using, what powertrain would it have, apart from it being electric, but from what supplier, and where the site of the production would be. We were not informed about this, and no data was provided, and not even, I think, indications were provided, because so that's the technological part, I think. The second part is, so you know, personal vehicles, EVs, are being developed by the largest market players and really enormous automotive companies, not mentioning Tesla and companies that are just focused on EVs, but Volkswagen, BMW, Daimler-Benz, and other huge companies, not to really hurt any other brands, but they're investing enormous funds into the development of both designs and the technology behind it. So all the components, all the production facilities, you know, battery companies, as I said, in Poland, sites are being developed to that extent. So it would be very difficult to begin a new brand now of really a normal personal car with no other distinction than it being Polish and having an aesthetical design, to a market that is already very saturated, actually, because there are many models of vehicles and many models of passenger electric vehicles available already on the market, already working quite well, being assessed highly from established and very powerful large companies. So this it's very difficult to predict, of course, but we have been given so little information about the project, the Izera project, that we can't even put that information against the actual market state at the moment, which, as I said, the market is very developed and established players are already very far in that regard.
Thank you very much. Philip, do you want to add something?
As regards the stage of development of the project, I cannot add much more than Alexander did, because actually said everything we know about the ISERA project, I think. Obviously, I would like to be more optimistic than Alexander was. I keep fingers crossed for the project and hope that it's going to be able to compete with Volkswagen and Daimler-Benz and other brands. But I understand this will be difficult. This project is obviously purposed also for because I didn't say it at the beginning of my presentation when the Act on Electromobility entered into force or was actually discussed in 2017 and 18. There was a discussion about how many vehicles it can create, and it should create a market for 1 million electric vehicles until 2025. I think that ISERA may be a kind of solution for that, but I'm not sure.
So do not turn off your microphone, because we have another question, in fact, concerning Tesla. Do you think Tesla will be the market leader from now on in the e-mobility industry, or other players can take the lead? Philip, yes.
If I am to answer, actually, I think Tesla is the leader by way of being first, and obviously is to some extent ahead of other market players. But I can see, for example, in the case of those trainings, electromobility in practice, we actually have opportunity to try other electric vehicles that are available in the market, and you can tell that Tesla is losing its priority. It's going to lose its priority shortly. I must say that. For me personally, this looks like Tesla will lose its priority shortly.
Thank you. Alexander, if you want to add something to that.
Well, Tesla is a completely different philosophy. It has been working on open patents and open licenses for its technology since the beginning. I think it's mostly a technology development company, really, if you look at it in a realistic way, because the models it offers are much more limited than the models offered by the largest market players in the automotive industry. That's the first thing. Second thing, Tesla develops components at a very high quality. I mean, batteries and other components. So, and it was first, as Philippe said. So it's more of a kind of interesting market player, but not a leader, I think, anymore. I think the automotive companies, the biggest ones, they will be market leaders, and they will compete at a balanced level because they have a whole array, a whole portfolio of products, whereas Tesla has 3 or 4 models that it introduces to the market. That's all.
Thanks a lot. I see somebody raised a hand. Is it possible now? It's possible to make the question. Pietro Altomani, do you want to try to make a question? Can you hear us? Can we hear you?
No, we can't.
Okay, so if it's not possible, please type the question, and we can still answer. Now we have the last one, or maybe last but one, but we will see. So which opportunities do you see for foreign investors in Poland? Who starts? Alexander, yes?
Well, the opportunities are vast. So I think, as I just briefly mentioned, and then Philippe really elaborated extensively, the law is still to be worked on and to be developed to really host e-mobility most efficiently. But in terms of potential, as one can see and one can observe, there are already a lot and many international and global players in Poland present. I am sure many more will come because the market is very big. And it has So it has traction to develop further and to attract investors, foreign investors. Of course, the state has to incentivize these mechanisms. It has to provide some kind of supportive measures so that investors can see that they will be supported in introducing their various technologies. A lot of charging infrastructure law is being prepared. So I'm sure a lot of these mechanisms will be launched in the coming years. So there will be space for many, many more companies. Also there are a lot of startups and companies being launched in Poland. I'm sure many of our participants and many of the people who will be listening to this have heard of Trigo, for example, a Polish startup, a Polish innovation fully developed here in Poland. And there are many projects like this that still need funding investment, apart from the fact that we still don't have a passenger personal EV producing facility in Poland. So our market is still waiting for that kind of investment. And so I think, yes, there is an enormous opportunity for foreign investors, but of course, this has to be supported by what the state has to offer, what the legislation has to offer, because technologically we're waiting for it and we need it. So the opportunity, as I said, is vast.
Thank you. Philip, do you agree from the legal point
Yes,
of view?
I agree. I just wanted to add that from my perspective, I can see that quite a big opportunity is now the private or half private charging infrastructure in buildings, residential buildings and public buildings, entities which are actually capable of creating a business model based on delivering such products to on a quite cheap price to EV users will have a good opportunity to make business in Poland. I would say. I must say that there is not enough legislation yet to make bigger operators, let's say, of private infrastructure. But I think it's going to, it has to be discussed shortly. So this is one of the opportunities that I see on the e-mobility market in Poland at the moment.
Thank you very much. So as I told you, we still have last questions from Pietro. Do you think that e-mobility will benefit from further increase of alternative ownership models such as sharing? Alexander or Philip? Yes, start please, Alexander.
Okay, so it already has, I think. And you can see that one of our member companies in our association, Panek, probably widely known and recognized, a huge brand now in Poland, uses electric vehicles since the beginning and is really extending its fleet in this regard. So yes, of course. I mean, the clean transport areas, low emission areas, as Filip mentioned, one of these projects in Kraków wasn't so successful, but Łódź is also thinking about it. Many other cities are thinking about it. Closing cities off to internal combustion engines, IC vehicles, is, I think, a trend that will take place sooner or later. And it will leave shared electric vehicles, shared electric bicycles, or just shared bicycles, electric scooters, and various other electric vehicles, e-buses as well. So it's a natural component of a closed municipal area that has a low emission or zero emission regulation. It's a natural choice, because if you have a larger distance to cover, then an electric vehicle in a shared ownership model is a natural choice. So yes, the answer is absolutely, it will benefit.
Thank you very much.
Yes, it is so much connected. I mean, the low emission transport zone is such a good solution for actually introducing electric vehicles to the city, both private electric vehicles, but also the shared electric vehicles. So I think this should be explored more. And in my personal opinion, low emission transport zone should be somehow obligatory for some parts of the cities. I know that it's a very dangerous and difficult discussion, but I believe that some parts of our cities should be closed, not only for the purpose of clean air, but also for the purpose of introducing electric vehicles and showing people how good they are for moving around the city.
Thank you very much. We are 9 minutes ahead of our time, so on my side we are coming to an end. We hope to see you all on the 20th of October on the EIBM online edition. I will now give the floor to the President for the final word.
Very shortly. Thank you very much to all the participants, and thank you very much to our panelists, very high-level panelists that gave us a clear picture of where Poland is going. I think that PSPA is a very outstanding association, and for us it's a reference point when we want to talk and understand where Poland is going in terms of e-mobility. So thank you very much, Alexander. Thank you very much, Philip. Thank you very much to everybody. Hoping to see you the 20th of October, all of you in our online AIBM meeting. Thank you and goodbye.